Hello, and welcome to my discussion of Topic 4, Realism and Immersion, regarded in Uncharted 4, The Lost Legacy. For those who may not know, Lost Legacy was originally planned to be DLC for Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, but ended up becoming a standalone expansion game released in 2017 that mainly follows the two side characters in India.
Nothing you can't handle.
As I talk, I will occasionally temporarily diverge your attention to instead pay attention to elements in this gameplay footage. Here, for example, we see Chloe, our protagonist here, being a sort of peeping Tom, trying to get a feel for the world, seeing why the streets are so empty, and potentially getting a read on the social anxieties we see in the citizens. For example, this is something that may be considered unusual, seeing a Ganesh statue haphazardly thrown about and not being sought after, since it is an important religious figure. Also, by seeing family rushing to get to their homes, knowing that there's probably trouble brewing in the air.
While you can.
And more obviously in this section, with a citizen getting abused. And this sort of realism that we see in the social aspect will become more relevant later on once we expose the topic a little bit more.
Shut up! He's lying. Get to the truck.
After this section, we also get Chloe being subject to a little bit more of this anxiety the citizens are feeling herself by having to go through a checkpoint. And this definitely makes you feel a little bit more immersed into the world, or searchered in, as one might say.
Checkpoint.
Since you're not just an observer, you're kind of a participant in the world, and
Hey, hold on.
not that different
What's your rush?
from the same elements that
How do I know
the
you're not
citizens
smuggling something
in
in
the
here?
world are subject to.
Arms up.
Also, there are some jump cuts in the two main sequences being examined.
Hey,
That is just for the sake
where do you
of
live?
trimming the unnecessary gameplay footage,
What
and
are
are
you,
not
deaf?
to represent several
Answer him.
sequences
I
necessarily.
said, where do you live?
So, in Frederick
I'm in
Jameson's
the middle of
essay,
something.
The Existence of Italy, he
Yes,
says,
sir.
Meet me inside.
Understood.
realism is to be conceived as the moment in which a restricted
with me.
code
Man with
manages
gun.
to become
Sir,
elaborated
what about her?
or
Just let her
universal. And
heard
Alexander
her. Keep
Galloway,
going.
in his book, Gaming, Essays on Algorithmic Culture, argues that realisticness, for him mainly being the practice of essentially simulating the actual world with photorealistic graphics and actions, is a common yet superficial way of understanding realism, as he even says that realisticness and realism are not the same thing. Realisticness may be understood as basic representational realism. Galloway is more interested in a different type of realism, the type he calls social realism. After quoting another scholar on realism in terms of critique of actual world events, societies, and ethics, Galloway says, I suggest that game studies should follow these same arguments and not turn to a theory of realism in gaming as mere realistic representation, but define realistic games as those games that reflect critically on the minutiae of everyday life, replete as it is with struggle, personal drama, and injustice. So we're using the photo mode in the game to serve as a pause function to be able to expose the environment around us a little bit more. And we can tell this is a good form of realisticness, where there's a lot of detail into the world, and as somebody who has lived in India for an extended period of time, I can testify that besides the flaming cities in the background, that this is a good depiction of some of the poverty-stricken areas of India. So now we'll be moving on to the next section. We're going to climb that tower over there. Here we are. That was quick.
And another old
Here we
fortress.
see Chloe
Sitting
writing
smack
down
dab
on
in the
her
middle of
map,
lake bed. I'll jot
and
it
when we
down
open the
in my
map,
notes book.
we can see how it's been implemented as a part of the diegesis, which is a nice way to suture the player into the world. As we're climbing this tower to see an absolutely beautiful part of this game, we'll be exposed to a little bit more of the realisticness or representational reality of a wondrous open door
So peaceful up here.
nature scene.
Okay, seriously.
If you wait long enough up here, Chloe will actually, well, say a joke about how this is something to get a trophy out of, and then do some wonderful yoga. He says true realism is impossible without the extension of the player's social elements. So, for him, it seems that a game could be considered as realistic even if it's not immersive, and vice versa. Since he focuses so much on realism, on a kind that doesn't necessarily rely on realistic physics and graphics like many think of in regards to realism. As long as it has the crucial social realism aspects, then it doesn't matter as much if the graphics are low res, the art style is abstract, and the gameplay is very basic, which are usually key components to achieve higher sense of immersion when developed to the full potential. The question of immersion is a way more subjective topic though, since realism has more of a concrete true or false reference point, that being the actual world. For Galloway, we can probably safely assume that he would approve of not only the realisticness that Lost Legacy depicts, but also the social realisticness that it depicts, at least in the beginning section that we looked at, where it focuses on the disenfranchisement of minorities and the injustice, and something that he wishes more games would focus on when trying to depict true realism. Here, after showing the monkeys something to get the player more immersed in besides just static objects and human enemies, we try and shoot them. Why not? To get a sense of immersion, of seeing what truly is possible in the world. But matter of fact, you actually can't shoot them. I try to show, well, obviously you gotta use an RPG, can't use a regular gun, that you can't even aim at the section where those oodles of monkeys were at.
Let's go.
So instead, we got to use our realism and immersion by pulling our RPG out of our purse, I guess, to really strike at that realism. Well, thanks for watching. Toodles.